guess the same thing.
Yeah, it is being filmed. Huh?
They gave me a mic and we'll use it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. Michael and myself and Ryan, one of the graduate students, is sitting in the back there. Though Trent was unable to attend. He's in class now. So these are a list of some collaborators, just to get that out of the way. Some people at Berkeley, or formerly at Berkeley, and one of Michael's close collaborators. We'll refer to something called GRI-Mech several times during the talk. So that's a team that Michael had worked with for years. There's a prime team. Zoran just walked in, a new postdoc here, and some other people throughout the country, and some support that we've been able to garner over the years. So in today, I'm talking about collaborative science, and by science, I'm going to mean mechanism understanding through modeling and experimentation for the purpose of prediction. That's what I mean by science today. The applicability is chemical kinetics modeling, atmospheric chemistry modeling, probably more things, maybe systems biology. And the goal of collaboration, what I mean by collaboration, is to it's not to work together necessarily. Hold hands and kumbaya, we all got to work at it. It's to figure out how to quantify all the information in the community's research portfolio. What's really there? What is the whole community established? Even though no one person is established, maybe one of those facts. The portfolio is diverse and individually generated. People are working on their own in their own groups. It consists of observed facts about behaviors, science experiments, and models, people who model things, who say that these parameterized models, maybe there's missing things in them, but I know I put my reputation, this explains what we're seeing. There's just some things we still need to fill in the blanks. And quantification is achieved through, disseminating this between them in discourse, but dissemination of what and by what means. So we'll focus on chemical kinetics modeling. Now, what I'm really going to focus on are these properties. The process models are complex, though physics-based governing equations are widely accepted as true. There's not really questions about that. Uncertainty exists, but much is known about where the uncertainty is. For instance, unknown parameters in large sets of differential equations. But the differential equations are accepted by the community as not really being under question. To a lesser or greater degree, but I'll say to a little degree. Numerical simulations can be carried out fairly reliably when you fix the uncertain parameters to certain values. So you can simulate these things. And you can also study the processes in the lab. So those things, obviously, those may be missing from other fields. There may be, okay, I think I'm losing my battery here, but I bought one.
While you're doing that, let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about process models, there's all different multi-scale models and many interesting pieces of physics. And what isn't always so agreed upon is when one level of modeling is applicable and gives you relevant information. Maybe everybody agrees on Navier-Stokes for fluids, but not everybody is going to do a fully resolved combustion turbulence simulation for a particular fluid problem. And so I don't know if that comes up in chemical kinetics, but that's also kind of an issue.
Right. What model is appropriate
When,
and when, yeah. So let me lead that. Definitely true. So this one would still have some debate in it. All of these are going to have some debate across the thing. And in this, maybe there's less debate about all of these than maybe in other fields. That's why maybe it's, Michael views this as a really prime candidate for the types of things we're doing, because it is such a mature place where these are the questions remaining. And obviously, systems biology is in a completely different place. And then everything in between, maybe. So methane combustion, that's the reaction we learn in high school. But that's the models of this have grown with complexity, that there's more steps. This isn't what happens. This is the kind of beginning and the end, or part of the end. But what actually happens? So in the 70s, there were actually 15 reactions with 12 species to describe that, intermediate species that get created and continue to react. We want to do better predictions. We need more details in that model. That people discover other things are going on. It becomes much more complicated. And now the typical model for this would have over 300 reactions in 50 species. And it's used to predict heat release and concentration formation over a wide wide scale, from all the way from producing work and heat to pollutant formation at parts per million and parts per billion. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with this. So the ODE model, there's an ODE model called GRI-3, which Michael led the development of, and it's a static. It is this differential equation model which I'm referring to here, and it's used as a common benchmark now, used in simulations when people want to numerically simulate methane combustion and predict a lot of these quantities.
One question, just like perfectly mixed, so that's why it's an ODE?
Yeah, this is an ODE model. Many mole type numbers.
Okay.
However, there's no restriction of PDEs.
Okay.
It will have the same ease.
We'll try not to.
The same ease. PDEs.
So how did that model come about? How did that differential equation model came about? These releases? Well, it embodies the work of many people throughout the world doing experiments and so on, not explicitly working together. And how did they collaborate to lead that model? In the informal mode, which we like to call it, they kind of assimilate conclusions of each paper sequentially. You kind of keep your eye on the journals as they're coming out. You talk to your colleagues. They tell you to read my paper, and data is available on my website. And the answer is no, that really didn't work. The community tried that, but the predictive capability, if you trace through the predictive capability, as better experiments were being done sequentially in time, the predictive capability of the models following that mode were not getting any better. They were just kind of oscillating around in some space of their ability to predict. They could kind of predict the latest thing that they seem to be paying attention to, but not older stuff. So why? Papers tend to lump modeling and theory, experiments, analysis, and additional assumptions, which we'll call convenience assumptions, to lead to a concise text-based conclusion. You've got 6 pages. You've got to have a conclusion. So you've got to make some additional assumptions to get that conclusion in the paper. And the conclusions are often conditioned on the additional assumptions necessary to make the conclusion concise. And therefore, it's impossible to reliably anonymously collaborate. By anonymity, I mean just I'm going to use your information that you're making available to the public, and you're going to use my information, and so on. Because the convenience assumptions are often unique to each paper. It's not that the papers are dishonest. It says right there, we're going to assume this. The problem is you go, well, wait a minute, that's precisely what I'm studying. So if you assume that, I can't use your results anymore because now we've just conditioned on the wrong things. And the goals of one paper are often the convenience assumptions of another. So therefore, it's really difficult to trace the quality of a conclusion reached across sequentially, combining these conclusions. Oops, sorry, this is a little. So in the posted data, this is often just a text-based conclusion in the E form. It's what's in the paper with often little information. So authors will stake their reputation on these things, the modeling and the theory and the experiments. Okay, that's the science in some sense. But if really pressed, perhaps not these. Yes, yeah, we did have to make those assumptions, and we skimped on the analysis in this point in order to get this. We made further analysis assumptions and so on. So, in fact, the canonical report, this is just summarizing that, description of the experiment, what was done, what were the conditions, how we're going to eliminate the biases and assess uncertainty, some description about the transport and chemistry models that involve in certain parameters, momentum, reactions, and so on. And then this is the imprecise part. Focus on some parameters. They're trying to do an experiment. Focus on some parameters that seem to be important for the experiment they're doing. Do that by evaluating some sensitivities at nominal parameters, doing some simulations. Make some convenience assumptions on parameters not being studied. I will draw from the literature this value, this value, this value, and this value. But what literature they draw from is unclear. And predict 1 or 2 parameter ranges and then post the values on the website with maybe not much uncertainty, not much description of uncertainty, and so on. So that's the problem. That's the science aspect, and the red is the problem. That's unfortunate. Why is that happening? Can that have something to do with the projector? I mean, this doesn't happen on my... There should be a white background with text. And this would be very bad if all of the slides with graphics on them look like that. Okay, so that's what it looks like now. Okay, cool. So here's an example taken from this data set. This is real stuff. So there's some experiments, 66 and 67, doesn't matter, that's how I'm labeled them. And there's models, and these experimental models depend on lots of parameters. Now the most influential parameter in experiment 66 is parameter 44. The second most influential parameter is parameter 45, and those are also the most influential parameters of experiment 67. So now the experimenter has a model, and then they do the experiment and measure some quantity plus or minus. And let's look at the feasible set that their measurement carves out in the parameter space. So experimenter 66, after they make their measurement, they've actually carved out this space in parameter space as being feasible. Now, if I go back to the previous slide, what they'll do is they'll say, well, parameter 44 was the most influential parameter. And so I'll kind of pretend that 45 is at its nominal value. And therefore, I have now learned that parameter 44 is between 0.3 and 1, and I'll report that. And that's my small, concise conclusion at the end of the paper, which describes the whole process through which I went through this. And hopefully that rate constant will be named after me type thing. Okay. So unfortunately, now 67 does an experiment, and this is effectively what they've learned. So and there the parameters are pretty equally important if you just kind of look at the slopes here. But let's just pretend that this one's slightly more important. So if they make a linearization, they detect that 44 is more important. They go through the same process, and they actually report an exact opposite interval. It's just something that doesn't even intersect it. Sorry. So, but maybe they read this paper first. It came out, and they see that that's been they can already get rid of this part of the feasible set. They're actually over here. And so they've actually learned something about the second parameter, that it's between 0.2 and 1. So that might be what they report, depending on their analysis. Or they note that everything is feasible from one corner of the cube to the other corner of the cube, and they go, oh my God, I didn't learn anything. And they just don't write a paper. Okay. So, or they report that they didn't learn anything. And when in fact, none of these are true. All these are wrong, because there's other parameters that are important too. Again, this model has many other parameters that have less and less of an influence, but they still have an influence. So if I just look at the next most important parameter for these models and look at the feasible set, so I'm still projecting down, this is the feasible set carved out by these two experiments. And we're actually just looking at this slice right along this row 34 equals 0 plane. That's what we're seeing. That little corner is the intersection of those two, which I haven't drawn in. These two intersect up here. And they're making kind of weird claims about their intersection that just aren't true, and rule out other things that haven't been ruled out by making these convenience assumptions. So kind of the key issue is that the feasible set doesn't look like a coordinate-aligned cube, coordinate along the natural coordinates in which people describe the problem. So, and that creates difficulty in how do we report things when we have things cutting across high-dimensional constraints. They're information, but they're not interesting to write down. So chemical kinetics modeling is a form of high-dimensional, because the mechanisms are complex, distributed because lots of people are working on the same problem. Methane here is methane there is methane there. System identification, that's really what it is. People are all trying to identify the same system by probing it. And the efforts of researchers yields complex, intertwined factual assertions about the model parameters. So everyone's learning things in different non-coordinate aligned ways. So the handbook style really doesn't work, because it leaves too much of the feasible set. It's too much of an outer bound on the feasible set. That picture I had. We'll talk about that again. Typically, any one experiment is not that illuminating in the problem's coordinates. It learns something. It makes a cut, but it doesn't make an interesting cut that can be narrowed, that can be concisely described as I've learned one very concise thing in the way we think about the problem. It cuts across the space. So you got to have this anonymous collaboration, information-rich anonymous collaboration, and you have to have computers to just manage everything, do the reasoning, do the inference, manage the list. And in that sense, the role of the paper is really to document, where that computer-readable assertion came from, and why, who it's attributed to, and why they believe it's true. So the alternative model is just separate asserted facts from analysis. And you don't mix the analysis, because that's often where in a paper you have to make this kind of convenience assumption. So the assertions are models about physical processes and observations about physical processes. Those two together, they form a constraint in this world parameter space of science. okay, or limited to, chemistry, let's say. And then analysis is just global optimization on these constraints, nothing more than that. Check the consistency of a collection of assertions. Check the sensitivity of the consistency to changes in a single assertion. Maybe you're suspect about something. Discover highly informative or highly suspect assertions. Explore the information. Maybe try to do prediction. Given all this chemistry models, these experiments that have been done in laboratories on idealized geometries and idealized flows, how do we make some predictions about ozone holes? But we want those predictions to be consistent with these experimental things, which were studied in a much smaller way. So do prediction on the feasible set, basically. And then you could always try to just generate parameter samples that are still unfalsified. As of yet, legitimate parameters for this model. No one has ruled them out. So that's what we call data collaboration. You're collaborating in the sense that you're trying to use everyone's constraints and it's on the data, but you're not really collaborating in a strict sense. So the GRI-Mech is this release. It's this high-quality predictive methane reaction model. It's based on 77 published experiments and outcomes from 25 groups. But the infrastructure that I kind of described didn't exist to have that come about in a natural way. It came about in a very, it came about in a grassroots effort led by Michael and some of those people that I led on the first slide. And they had to decide on a very large, encompassing list of reactions that they were going to include in their model that the community would not dispute. Then they had to go back through these papers and basically extract out what's the information. Maybe call people on the phone, we really need this, because what's in your paper I can't use. And if you want me to use it, I got to have the other information. So really a lot of reverse engineering. What is the real assertion that this paper makes, not the conclusion that it makes? So, and then the rest, relatively easy. That's in quotes. It's just to point out that was, because it's not easy, but that was the big leap, and then you've got this stuff. So then, for instance, optimization to get a best fit parameter, validation on other results, and they only use really the raw assertions of this research, even though it wasn't maybe put out that way. So that's the give me your information, not your conclusions, which was, I think, the title of our proposal once. Treats models and experiments as constraints. That's what they are. Nothing more than that. They're just constraints, and we've got to carry them along and combine them all, and it addresses the lack of collaboration in the post-data processing. And then with the assertions in place, much more can be inferred. So that's actually when I kind of started working with Michael, and we started playing around with this thing we'll call the data set, which is these assertions, and started to look at what else can you compute, and that's where we're at now. So there were some criticisms. These are some of the sociological things. People are unwilling to, I'll let you just read them. No one can analyze my data better than me. It's too early. So the causes for objection, some of these are really science versus engineering type objections. We can't do that yet. We don't know this. And well, we got problems. We got to try to do it. So, of course, the distributed effort, as Jim was talking about, dilutes any one specific contribution. Who's going to get credit if it's not clear? Just all of us combined our constraints together, and that led to the Nobel Prize. Who gets it? Okay. Protection of an individual territory, and there was opposition. You didn't use my results, and so on. So anyway, that's the sociological thing that's still there, and there's just some hope that. So our perspective is to, in Michael's perspective, is to really put this infrastructure in place for chemical kinetics, deploy the tools, deploy the data, and let everyone mine this information and uncover hidden reality. Provide tools that people can choose to use or not use, but really provide the data. That's it. Provide a place for everyone to drop their data in a very, very controlled way. And the value will hopefully entice groups to contribute new assertions as they emerge and illustrate the concepts with examples. So Michael's not going to talk today about there's behind this. Zorn and Michael are creating this with other people, are creating this reality. And in fact, the kickoff meeting is 2 weeks from today. I think maybe in this room. I'm not sure.
No, that was booked.
Okay. So the people will be here, and that's not what we're going to talk about today. But it's a CITRIS project and hosted at CITRIS and so on. So, sorry, that looks like that somehow got stuck on there. So let me talk about the data set. The data set are these assertions, these 77 assertions. So it consists of a reaction model, which we talked about. Looks like that, but really that. Some unknown parameters. That has about 100 plus unknown parameters in this reaction model. Some prior information. The parameters have bounds on them, and through coordinate transformations have been negative 1 to 1. And then there's all these experiments that people have done throughout the world. And what's common to the experiments is methane. So these processes, and the processes have models. They all share the same chemistry model, and they all have different kind of transport model, different fluid mechanics, different heat transfer, whatever it was that they built. But what's common, so same chemistry, different transport, a measurable outcome that, in terms of a model, the measurable outcome is clearly a function of this parametrized chemistry. And here we're saying, Jim, it's not a function of anything else. The fluid mechanics is so simple, these things have been designed so that that part is not an issue. These are very, they're made so that the flow is one-dimensional and so on. I mean, again, Michael can speak to that. But I think these have, over the years, have evolved to where these really, even though they have to involve fluid mechanics and they have to involve other things, that's well modeled because of their simplicity.
And actually, if it becomes an issue, part of the certainty of transfer can enter into general uncertainty. So it is kind of exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm. So the experiments I was thinking of, and wondering if they fit in yours, are the ones that John Bell and Phil Colella tried to model, which are these turbulent flame fronts, and they have some laboratory data that they get, and in which case it's all about the mixing. And that sounds like that's a different set of experiments here, because there the transport is a big piece of it.
Actually, the latest success story in NS was done with GRI-Mech.
Using the chemistry to match the simulation, right?
Right. So it's all the same thing.
So, and then each of these people have measured something and hopefully reported some uncertainty. And so those become the constraints. So there's prior information, and then there's assertions associated with an experiment, an experiment with uncertainty, and a model. And that's really, as I call this, that's the research portfolio expressed just as deterministic constraints. And you do global optimization over these. How you do that is a question, but that's really what, kind of extracting it. That's what these 77 experiments have established about this chemistry model. So we saw that, if you want to do it informally, like let's keep track of parameters plus and minus, you can, first of all, you can make mistakes. We saw that with those slides where the people were making extra assumptions. So you could say, let's not make any extra assumptions. Let's do it right. So it's easy to do wrong, as we saw. But we could do it simple and right. And you'd have parameter values plus or minus uncertainty, and equivalent to requiring this coordinate-aligned cube containing the feasible set. So like we describe it, very linear in the number of parameters. You'd have two numbers, midpoint plus or minus, midpoint plus or minus. The problem is we know that this is really ineffective in extracting the information, because look at everything you're including, and this is 3 dimensions, not 100 dimensions. So we know that the volume, drops, very quickly in that sense. So this is an ineffective way to manage the. It's simple. This I can email you. We can email each other column vectors of 2 numbers, center plus or minus, center plus or minus. And so you don't have to be very fancy in your information technology, but it's just going to throw out a lot of stuff. So let me skip this. We've played with, this is one of the things I said, we've started playing with the data set to try, it's mostly to give Michael ammunition to go to his community and say, look, if we do it this way, look at all these interesting things we can compute. The details of what we're computing right now, they may not be quite right. We're going to, because the data set is 8 years old, we're going to make it much better with the new tools. But look at what we can compute. And so, I'd like to talk about that a little bit. I'm not, let me just say, if you do what we had on the previous slide, the coordinate-aligned cube, if you overbound the feasible set that way, and you try to make predictions, you typically will lose a lot of information. It was clear from that diagram, the volume, the 2-volume ratio was probably 5 to 1 or something. And sure enough, we've done some computational experiments, and in 70% of the cases, the loss from computing over the overbound to computing just on the feasible set, the loss in some quantity, not computing it accurately, is typically about 70% as well. So lots of experiments have huge amounts of loss. No, here's the loss, I guess. And some don't. So you don't want to do that. There's a big drawback to that. So you got to have collaborative environments where you can share this stuff and do the global optimization on the real feasible set. The other thing we did with that is we were able to establish that the 77 assertions are all consistent. There are parameters that will explain everyone's data within their uncertainty without error, within the error bounds. But two of the experiments, a consistency measure, we defined a consistency measure, very sensitive to two of the experiments' information. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe these are just the best experiments that have ever been done, and maybe they're great experiments. But it's a little suspicious when no one else's experiments looks like that. So either these two people had something on everyone, or something's wrong. So we called them up and asked them to just check it out. And a week later, they reported that, they had published, it was published incorrectly, and gave us the new numbers, some calculations had been done. And then now the sensitivity to all these experiments is much more even. These scales, I think, are the same. And now, maybe these are wrong, maybe not. But there's certainly nothing flagging them as being extraordinarily excellent or possibly wrong. So that was very nice. Again, that was a real victory for showing the ability to analyze these 77 things in one way, where the old think would not have done that. Okay, so this is the thing that Michael's kicking off, Michael and Zorn and the others, and I'm playing a part in. And the idea is that it's really focused on combustion for now. Combustion impacts everything. Energy is everything, really. And it's economies, politics, and the environment. And the predictive capability of combustion models, leads to decisions and policy making. And so this is a very important thing. And so this is a community activity aimed at developing higher quality, at a bigger turnover rate, higher quality models for prediction to help people make decisions better. And challenge for predictive models for industry, petrochemical, combustion engineering, automotive, pharmaceuticals, and to also create this kind of new scientific method of how we're going to do science. We can't individually make a hypothesis, do an experiment, make a conclusion. It just doesn't work that way at this point. It's too complex. So the theme, the scientific community builds the system. The in-process informatics, that's what we call this data, another word for this data collaboration, and that builds the community. So this is a kind of a way to think about prime. So this is hopefully in a year or two. So the chemists asked prime, I'll let you read it. There's something about some reactions, and how would that help compute something fairly scientific? Prime tells them, so prime would be this system. Can discriminate. Chemist says, I don't think I can do that. What should I do? And prime says, do something else. So that's hopefully a year or 2 or 3 years out. Then maybe a little more, an engineer, not a scientist.
It's really not a chemist to count the Born numbers and hypothesize chemicals there.
What's that? Oh, maybe we mixed up a little bit.
That was taken from proposals that was sent to chemistry division of NSF. But we can replace.
C16H8?
Huh?
C16H8?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with this.
C14H7 and 1 for hydrogen.
Yeah, these are full ring structures. Nanotubes, full rings.
They have the structure. Okay.
Or some other stuff.
So here, it's a much more, you were talking about an engine, and we don't have an answer, and then someone 20, a policymaker. That would be the goal. Okay. So, who are the contributors to this prime? Well, maybe, hopefully, some of you will be contributors. Theoreticians, experimentalists, physical models, scientific computing, and numerical analysts. And, from information about elements, maybe there's not much to do there. Species, reactions, experiments, models, and tools. So prime will become this entire thing. So what's an example of how someone would use prime? I need an ODE model for natural gas combustion at the following conditions. So then that's a parameter ID problem. The chemistry would come from this part of the database. And then the conditions have described what experiments the model that they need should be conditioned on. Are there experiments in the data set that are closely tied to that, pressures and temperatures? What are the numerical models associated with those experiments? And this was really our parameter space, the space of the parameters that were unknown. And this is the measurements of the experiments. That was the experiments themselves, the models. And the ID happens, and then the referable archive comes back up. It gives it a digital object identifier number. And the person can refer to that this is how I produced this simulation. You can go back and do it. And you'll get exactly the same answers as I do. Maybe some things have changed in the data. We could do it now with the current values in the database, and we'll actually get different numbers because people have updated information. But you can always go back, run exactly what I got. There's no question. You'll get exactly the same answer.
So when you say get exactly the same answer, the numerical model says here's the algorithm to solve it too. Is that part of it? Because if you use a different algorithm, I'm just kind of understood what you were saying.
In the sense of what I'm saying is that this thing will be maintained by the community, and with revision tracking.
But it includes the algorithms too.
Yeah, so the algorithm would be part of the identifier would describe everything that went into that calculation, and you could change it. You could repeat the calculation but make modifications. But if you want to see, I don't even believe that, I'll run it again. Then you could, how about check the joint consistency? Someone looks through and they go, I don't believe all these things. There's no way those 17 things could have happened. So let me check the joint consistency of these experiments. So they specify which experiments to check. They get the models. It does a consistency analysis. Same thing. And then maybe I'd like to predict the range of ozone at 40 kilometers using an atmospheric model that's available, let's say, using certain experiments. So conditioned on certain experiments. So the same thing, some sort of prediction, experiments, models. So those are the lab experiments that they want to condition on. Here's the model for the NOA model, and then it goes back. So science models would have to be in here as well. Okay. So we've also worked on using the same idea. We've made these presentations to, we've coordinated with Adam Arkin. And we've gotten introduced to the Alliance for Cellular Signaling. So that's similar in origin to GRI-Mech, actually. The story is the same. There was a few people very unhappy about the way their community was kind of pooling things. Everyone's doing high-quality work, but somehow it isn't coming together right. Because they tend to leave out interactions for simplicity's sake. So this is the idea of Gilman, who was a Nobel laureate, and do this. So they started a Penn laboratory program investigating questions in cell signaling. And the goal was to basically create some high-quality data from a single cell type. Okay, so that people could start comparing things. And everything's available at gateway.org, this thing. And then there's some quotes about that the collaboration is actually the biggest experiment of the whole process. Our scientists are going to work together. So you can grab these things. He's a biochemist at UCSF. And there's a vision paper in Nature that talks about the socialistic aspects of science. So again, similar to the criticisms that Michael received when they produced this large model by synthesizing lots of other people's work and their own work as well. Could that have happened in a more natural way where that's where everyone was going for? And this talks about, maybe that might be difficult.
So do you have an example, besides this one, of a community of science that has done this before? Well, I don't know about climate, but somehow it seems that the climate community has an awful lot of satellite data that they've been sort of jointly pooling for a long time. I'm just wondering if is there prior art in the social experiment?
Well, I'll say, Michael works closely with a climatologist or an atmospheric chemist. Maybe that's
Actual situation in atmospheric chemistry, per se, is not even as good as in combustion in this sense. They still, in what Dave Goldman likes to call one of the leaders in 19th century type. But there are communities, astrophysicists and astronomers, and I'm in contact with them and so on. They are collaborating in what sense? That they agreeing, because equipment, whatever it is, they agreeing to keep a common data available to all. But that's where it lands. So in other words, the maximum how people went far to create, let's say, common website or shared data or whatever it is, but again, not analysis. Because the whole point of it, it's everything is kind of part of an analysis. Everything part of it, not just not sequential.
You have to share models and data
Right.
and tools.
So what about the protein folding community? Would that be reasonably close to that situation?
Protein folding doesn't do modeling except MD.
Well, yeah, it's I mean, there is actually an annual competition where they give you a chain of amino acids, and then people struggle with their own tools trying to figure out what the model is.
You just said it.
Exactly, and then they compare against the actual experiment, and then the big argument starts whose tool is actually correct. And so
This reminds me of 1960s and combustion. That combustion went through about a quarter of a century ago.
So I guess one step that you're ahead then is that you have a set of tools that's accepted by the whole community.
We're building them. They are. What more important is that what's accepted by community, what Andy said, is that fundamental physics of some of the systems, let's say Latin, is more or less acceptable now. So people don't argue about much whether we're missing some big piece of science.
So you said that the astrophysicists collaborate. They're motivated by the fact the equipment to collect the data is incredibly expensive, so they have to share it.
Right.
So once you get enough data, the equipment to analyze the data is incredibly expensive because you need a supercomputer or something. Or for the protein folding, people use folding at home just the way they did SETI at home. And so I'm wondering, is there another economic motivation to collaborate at the analysis stage too?
I'm in contact, in fact, with people like Alamandola and Tillans who are leading astrochemists, and so on. And I'm offering them exactly that, joint forces, because some of the chemistry we're dealing with exactly what they need. And they're interested in that, but I don't know. Tillans told me that he's trying to push it through European community to create center. But now he moved here to NASA Ames. But in any case, people who are doing quantitative analysis of data are very few in the world. Generally, a lot of everyone who is respected are experimentalists, like organic chemists, synthetic guys, and so on. People who do an analysis, physical chemists and system biologists, and minorities. Now, will they benefit? Will other communities benefit by that? I think yes. And to what extent? It depends on the advance.
So just real quick for the calcium, because we worked. Ryan dug deep into the biochemistry. He really switched from being a mechanical engineer to that, and we basically tried to use our tools to basically do some model discrimination on these three models. These have appeared more or less every 6 years on some calcium signaling, and each one is a little more complex than the previous one. And they're their ODEs derived from a hypothesized network. And just the results, using the tools which I haven't explained, the Goldbetter model was a 6 ODE model with 20 parameters, of which biochemists could put down some ranges on the parameters, perhaps make some assumptions that maybe people would agree to disagree on, but reasonable. And we were able to invalidate that in 30 minutes with the tools we have. The Wisner model is a little bit bigger dynamically and significantly bigger parameters. And on just a 10-node machine, which is just our 10 computers kind of talking to each other through the file server, it invalidated in 2 days. And
what do you mean by invalidate?
So we're able to prove that there is not a point. The feasible set of all those constraints is empty. The intersection of the sets carved out by each of the constraints is empty. So where were the constraints? There were 18 experimental assertions on this. So this calcium signal model is here. There's 18 pieces of experimental data. You you ligand doses and signal responses, calcium responses. 18 pieces of data. Can this one model with 20 parameters, all of which are take on values in ranges, is there any parameter which will explain all that data to within its measured accuracy? So think of it as 18 constraints on this 20-dimensional parameter space, and it's empty. and we prove it's empty. Okay? And the proof is basically a data structure which I'll describe what the proofs are. And then the Lemon model, the more recent model, even larger, feasible points were actually found in 8 hours, so it wasn't invalidated. Then some new data came along, and that invalidated it. So those have all been invalidated, and what it just means that there's the question is what do they take from that? Well, it means that they believe their experiments, then the network that they've put down is certainly not adequate, and so likely there's something else is missing from the signaling pathway. Now these tools were not part of model-directed experimentation were not part of the original AfCS mission. It was really to collect data on a single cell type and make it available throughout the world, even though this data was collected at different experiments. But the Alliance is acquiring an appreciation for these types of questions which use the data to do something. How are we computing? So remember that this was the constraint. The model at a parameter minus the measured thing should be within the experimental uncertainty. There's lots and lots of experiments that have been done. So if I wanted to invalidate, I'd want to show that that set is empty. There's my prior information, the constraint from the experiment J, and this is the fact that everybody's got to agree because we're all talking about the same parameter, the same space. So our invalidation certificates are actually, we kind of branched and bound. So it's a binary tree with L leaves. And at the ith leaf, we have this is a cube in our parameter space. We have a coordinate line subset cube of that. We have some polynomial or rational functions, which I'll call surrogate models, and error bounds. So the surrogate model, this is on the ith cube, so some subcube. It's a much simpler function that is very close to the actual model. Think of this model as large list of ODEs with some transport in them. So they evaluate nearly to the same result on the parameter space, but there's some error bound. And then we add the experimental error had a U, so we add the additional error we have in modeling. And then we have basically, this is a polynomial system of inequalities. This is just a cube. This is a polynomial and a system of inequalities. And we have a proof that this polynomial system of inequalities is empty, which proves that this is empty. So
reduce it to SDP?
Yes, so that's what we're using, okay? And then moreover, if you go through this tree, you'll find out that the whole big cube is represented. You've broken it down into subcubes, and every cube has an invalidation certificate on it. Now, the caveat is these error bounds are not precise. I mean, these are estimated statistically. These are complex. These are like supercomputing models, maybe somewhere between that. These are differential, high-order, nonlinear PDEs, ODEs, and these are polynomial approximations of them, of their outcome. So there's a lot of computing, which I'll talk about. So these are generally heuristic, and they assume some regularity in them. So that's what the proof is, though. You can dig in and get to a cube. You go, here's his model for that cube. Let me see. Let me play around with it and discover that the error bounds seem right. So the proof is a proof in quotes. Okay? But it's traceable. You can drill down and do what you want with it. So I'll just talk real quick. I don't think I really have time. We're building quadratic rational functions to approximate these models. So imagine I had the large model and I've sampled it. Oh, this should have been a row. Sorry, I've really confused things. Oh, no. It's the row variable, but these are specific values. So I've sampled my model at, let's say, L places throughout a cube. How do I build? My goal is to build a quadratic a rational approximation of that. I'd like to minimize the fitting error. So minimize the peak fitting error on my samples using a rational quadratic function, but I'd like to make sure that the denominator, I want to bound that, keep the swing on the denominator over the entire domain. So I don't want to know that the denominator is not small on the samples. I want to make sure it has a certain swing, which I will allow. So this gives me richer approximations in quadratics. So we're able to, nice, interesting functions you can get with rational quadratic functions. The parameterization only has twice as many parameters as quadratic functions. So we're not going to cubic, which just will explode in your problem dimension. And this gives us this condition number on the denominator gives us kind of explicit control, non-explicit control of the behavior off sample points. I can guarantee my fit is not going to have holes in it that I just didn't know about because of the sample points.
So the only way you do the model is with sample points, and there's all this other technology for automatically generating error bounds
propagating Jacobians maybe, but not doing error bounds in a global parameter. I have a parameter going from 1 to, this is all, and this would all be, I would think.
Yeah, just by propagating Jacobians.
Okay.
Just wondering.
So this is how we're building and this can more or less be itself reformulated into a bisection on semi-definite programs. So I won't go through that. So just okay. So we build some rational. So we build rational or polynomial functions on cubes. Let's just cut to. Actually, this is important, I guess, right here. Basically, lots of our computations beyond there's scientific computations, numerical simulations has to be done a lot. Beyond that, lots of computations are basically proving emptiness of systems of quadratic inequalities. That systems of quadratic inequalities have no feasible point in them. Lots of the calculations become that. Here's another example of something that we did with the data set that Michael had. The data set. Suppose I take a model, a new model, and I'd like to predict its range on the feasible set. So I have 77 pieces of information throughout the world. And I have a new model, let's say the ozone hole model. I'd like to know what is the possible range that can take on, the min and max over the feasible set. So it's just global optimization. That's all it is. And we have some ways of computing outer bounds, a lower bound on the minimum and upper bound on the maximum. And we'd like to look at these bounds and treat them as functions of the experimental uncertainty. And let's see, how would the bound tighten if someone was able to do their experiment at a tighter experiment, if they were able to tighten up the quality of their experiment. So we computed these for many random models. And basically what it helps you find out is essentially that some of these experiments in the data set are very informative and some are not. Though on their own, they all look informative. Every one of them looks like it all cuts out the feasible set. But when you combine them in 77, some of them have already been subsumed by other experiments. So here are some of these this is one experiment. This is its multiplier. It basically is not ever good at reducing the prediction interval in a model. We tried 10,000 models and it never is able to reduce it. A different experiment has slightly better multipliers. So these are 4 from the 77. So it is able to often improve the prediction of random models, their range. Another experiment looks like that, and the best experiment looks like that. It often is able to have a provable effect on your ability to predict the range of some other model. And that's been done over some 10,000 random models in so I could quantify a little bit more how they were chosen and why they're relevant, but I won't. Again, it's more ammunition to Michael. Guys, we can compute these things once we have this in place. So how are we computing? Why are we doing the emptiness proofs on the algebraic model? So this is something that I'm going to, maybe agree or disagree with Jim. So why did I have to change into algebraic models, those polynomial rational? The original problem was I just want to invalidate this where this is this ODE system, let's say, or PDE system. So let's say in its simplest form, think of MJ as the response at a fixed time of an ODE model with parameters rho from a fixed initial condition. So I could derive invalidation certificates directly from the ODEs using basically Lyapunov functions. I could do reachability analysis using Lyapunov functions. Assume the vector fields are polynomial, and I could actually prove that the ODE system cannot get within this many units of that value for any value of the parameter. And just flat out prove it without ever simulating, without ever doing any fits. You'd use sum of squares and STP to bound this reachability. You'd get sufficient conditions using semi-definite programming. For the methane model, I can't even compute how large, I could. The STPs would be of an unimaginably large size. So you can't do this now.
That wasn't what I was
saying.
I like your approach. I just thought that using the Jacobian propagation, you could estimate, I think, what you called the EIJ.
Okay. We're estimating now with, statistically, and we could. So perhaps a fresh look could reveal it. So if we're trying to actually combine simulation and these types of proofs, I think, again, the methane, I think these problems are just far too complex for that. We're trying to do it in smaller problems in control. So last thing I'll say about the experimentation. So again, there's some pragmatic issues. Again, as we just talked about, we have to estimate error bounds on our ability to model this behavior with something reasonable. Now, we're willing to branch and bound, so we might have some subcubes. Now, the error bounds that we estimate, they're more likely reliable if this is a well-behaved function of the parameters. So basically, through experience and domain-specific knowledge, the scientist who's doing the experiments is really responsible to design experiments with features that are measurable in the lab so that they can make small errors in making their measurement. The feature model, whatever it is they're measuring, is well behaved over the parameter space. That's why we're going to be able to more or less approximate its behavior with a function. And it should show sensitivity. Whatever they've done should show sensitivity to these unknown things. So this constraint that they're going to establish hopefully matters. You could establish constraints that just, oh, we've already, that doesn't matter. We've already cut that space out. Well, these, of course, are the three qualities of a good experimentalist. So there's nothing that, we still need that. You can't, it's not we're proposing that you put monkeys in a chemistry lab and just videotape what they do and knowledge will proceed. Because they would basically produce, large errors, models that aren't fittable, that aren't approximatable by these nice functions and constraints that wouldn't matter. So, and of course, if we estimate this incorrectly, it even breaks the analysis. We can make incorrect conclusions, and that'll happen. But therefore, prudent experimental selection is still critical to the success of this, and that's important. So how are we computing? I'm almost done. I'll just give you one more minute. We're transforming real models to polynomial models, doing large-scale computer experimentation on the models, sampling to determine sensitivity, experiment design. We're fitting with polynomials irrational. We're assessing our residuals, accounting for fit error. Assertions become constraints in that mathematical formalism. Most analysis is optimization subject to those constraints, kind of semi-definite programming, and for the outer bounds to give proofs, and just local optimization to give inner bounds. And we branch and bound to eliminate the ambiguity due to the fit errors. And given that, the overall approach, if you think about it, it really parallelizes easy in the at-home type mode. I mean, there's just lots of things that are independent that just need to be done. And later, there's problems that aren't independent. Some of these semi-definite problems have to be done on everything, but lots of stuff parallelizes easy. You're branching and bounding, well, then you've just broken the problem up. You've got to do computer experimentation on 77 models. Well, that's 77 different things that can be done separately. And then on a model, you've got to sample its parameter space. That can also be done separately. So there's a lot of brute force parallelization that will make this, we can turn $400 PCs into a supercomputer. It should work well in that. We've got some papers that describe all this. There's a website which has the papers and the links and the slides. Didn't put my email up. So the conclusion, last slide. Collaborative science is a rich, large-scale practical problem that improves the consistency in which scientific results are used to make decisions and set policy. These are examples of that. GRI-Mech and Prime and AfCS to an extent. It requires data sharing, it requires model sharing, and it requires math tools to do the inference. And hopefully, the math tools are just going to get better. And it requires computers, obviously. Those are going to get better. This is something that just people have to commit to doing. And the benefits are, it's kind of without being too grandiose, it's a new scientific method. It's a roadmap to reliable prediction. It does transfer information between these disciplines and scales. Remember that these models were very heterogeneous, and so on. The present challenges are the community involvement and the participation. The privacy versus openness. People may want to do proprietary calculations on this stuff, and who's going to, where does that fall? And is Prime, for instance, going to allow that? Are they going to charge a fee for that type of stuff that will be returned to everybody? If your experiment was used in doing this calculation, you receive a royalty. I don't know. And a convenient infrastructure to pull it all together. So that's where we're going for the next 5 years, and. We appreciate your listening and attention. Thanks.
Just
Yes?
thinking about what you're saying about the community involvement and sort of the sociology of that. I think it sounds like right now you have a small enough set that you're able, in these examples, to assess the experiments and the labs and the experimenters they come from individually, and humans are doing that. But as it grows, it seems like you have an issue of sort of a potential tragedy in the commons where there's this data there. What's the incentive to contribute? You can just take other people's data and use it to improve your own conclusions and stuff. So I'm wondering sort of two aspects of the sort of reputational infrastructure. Like first, how you might motivate contribution. You were saying some financial incentives, but I wonder if there are sort of ways to do a little social engineering to encourage that. But also how you assess the quality of contributions, because it seems like that'll become an issue the more this expands, and you may even want to like build into the model some sort of weighting for how good is the data coming in, because the researchers are providing their own uncertainty estimates for these parameters, but those estimates themselves may have some degree of uncertainty that varies lab by lab.
So the overall layout has, although it's very open, there still is a governing board that's going to try to, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, we don't want to make a mistake which is done with Wikipedia. Right? No, from the very beginning, in fact, the problem with Wikipedia confirmed what we planned earlier, make people feel better. The logic is the following, that in any case, it should be community involvement in assessment of data which comes in. Not censorship, but assessment. But the only difference that we're going to do here, it's always done in science. You have evaluation panels and quality control, IUPAC groups and chemistry and so on. They're doing exactly that. But all what they do, they're doing it very much in 19th century technology. They're looking exactly on the sizes of hypercube independently. And then it's gut feelings that this experiment is right or wrong. This is kind of language they use. The difference that these tools will allow to make the assessment faster, more convenient, and more consistent. And actually, in the end, maybe individuals are dependent. It's hard to say. On the other issue that you wrote, because very important issue, how do you measure contribution of people? Because that's what we work for. Promotions and tenures and glory and awards, right? Now, and this is an important issue. And what it's basically telling us is that if we as scientists want to be honest, we have to reconsider the system of awards. It's such a, but we cannot even raise this issue because we'll be killed now. Because it's well established, you will go to promotion, a list of publications and so on. All the things that really we all know doesn't mean much anymore. So, but this is what deans like to do. So how it's going to change? It's a really challenge to the entire community. We're not trying to address it now. It's too big a question. It's simply going to get killed at this rate. But in principle, we already have tools that Andy kind of mentioned a little bit about. We can tell you now how much your report contributing to quality or meaning. Now, do we want to publish it? Do we want to make it? Do we want to advertise it? Probably not. Is it available? Yes. How you want to use it? It depends on infrastructure of funding agencies and everything else. But basically, this creates a different paradigm for publishing science. Not anymore journal articles as a key merit of your work.
You almost want to elevate something like a micro publication, like you get a small amount of credit on your CV for contributing something valuable that turns out to be valuable in a system like this.
Say that if you make one little contribution that always comes as a major peak, that this is your result is most sensitive, I mean most valuable in making prediction or making assessment of ozone hole more reliable. And your peak is always number one.
It's like a citation.
It's going to be more than, no, citation index is anecdotal.
Automated citation.
No, it's scientifically based citation. Citation index now, if I will goof and I will write goofy paper, I will have citation index go through the roof. We all know this issue, right? This basically tells you citation which you really deserves. That's basically what it means.
Although it's interesting because you have the risk of it being an artifact of the order things are selected in the algorithm or something as well. I mean, if you have similar items and one of them happens to, there are people who want verification that it is, being done in a.
But okay, all of the logic also here is that it's not one person runs the system or system runs itself, right? It's basically every user can pose any questions. And with any use the word assertions, right? You can make your own assertion to the same data. So, and let's say, and come to a different conclusion, but now when you write a conclusion, it will have more weight. Why? Because you use the same data. It's not now that you write your paper and say, I disagree with this guy. Say, oh, but you probably did wrong experiments. That's what they will say. But if you say, I use the same data that you used to make your conclusion, and I prove now that you basically did not take into account this, and that, it becomes, in my opinion, if you think logically, not gut feelings, then you will have more weight. It gives you more chance to be one voice objecting and spoiling the whole thing.
If the platform, if the scientists evaluating that trust the platform, then I absolutely agree with that.
If scientists base their decision on the same data and the same tools that you use, and you show that you did it now in a different way, and you got different results, it should give more credibility, right? Because they can shoot it out. Or you use different data, now you use the same. You use different tools, now you use the same. You just, and you can articulate your assumptions. Is that what wrong? It's all, but basically what this eliminates is gut feeling argument. It only focuses on logic. What we should be doing in science. And often not.
There still can be mistakes.
Yes.
And things will backtrack. And everyone will recognize that was wrong. That assertion was wrong. And now everyone, I guess there's no way around that. Some stuff's going to get in that's going to get through they separate it into a warehouse, which is unchecked. You can retrieve any data in the warehouse that's not been checked. And then the library, which has gone through this vetting, you could, as a contributor, protest that your thing was vetted out and then use the tools and try to show why it doesn't make sense that mine's being eliminated. What should be eliminated is the thing that's in there that's keeping mine out for the following reasons. I think that would be, again, the ideal situation. Mistakes are going to be made, and people will, through their ego and love of, they'll fix it.
But it will be in person's hands, so to say, still. And I think this is what the question is. If you kind of overstepped, you will have, now if you overstep, it's for political reason and because you don't have the names of that guy. All things that you don't control.
Right, somewhat democratizing it.
Right.
In
this way, you will be able to make your statement with much more weight that cannot be ignored.
If you have a system that publicly documents sort of your performance on the site too, that can be a powerful motivational tool for junior researchers as well.
Right. And that's actually part of the things that we want to do. But when I bring it up to contractors, they all scared. In first reaction that I got from program manager of UE said, Michael won't eliminate our job. So it's a lot of sociological issues. Yeah. And our strategies are now, let's not push too far, and not to say what it actually may mean, right? Let's do it. Let's give it to public the tools, and let's see where it goes, because young people like you will actually turn it into right tool. When old guys come from the previous generation, right, then young guys will do it right. That's a hope.
Christian.
In terms of much less controversial use, it seems to me that a system like this could be used for creating review papers on the fly, just literally every 4 to 6 months. So that someone just walking into an area can
grabbing what's been interesting, been done.
It's just all at once. I mean, this is what in terms of what I'd like collaborative science to do sort of instantly. So you don't have to wait every 5 years or every 10 years for a big comprehensive review article to see, Johnson said in 95 this was right, and then you find out, a year after your qual that, well, actually, so that happens too often. So is there a way to, it's pretty banal, it's not nearly as far-reaching as what you guys are trying to do right now, but is there a way to build into this system as it is, this kind of...
Just automatic, almost summary of the state of the field at this...
But it is in. It's a matter of fact, it's all built on XML technology and on pedigreeing and all, even, and we need more help from the good science to do it. But basically, every single step, that's a vision.
Shankar, I'm sorry.
Whatever it's done, it's automatically documented by computers, not by humans. So it will be scientific kind of conclusion making and documenting. But what you're talking about, this is done automatically underneath, and everything from day 0 to whatever it is, You can always create history, who did what, when, why. So you can ask any question. Let's say they want to do what is the latest contribution and the impact of it is, right? Or what is the most active, let's say, the data being accessed. This is all done by all metadata which is being.
That's great. Yeah.
But again, it's great, but it's only for one person who's doing it now, right? And so, or two.
Right.
I mean, programming-wise,
Right.
we need tremendous support. I mean, not just money-wise. We need people from computer science to really help us to build these tools.
Right.
And this is a big one of the biggest difficulties.
Have you talked to the folks at SIMS?
And where?
The School of Information?
No.
They may have, Bob Blushko does a lot of the XML systems engineering work, information, which is interested in working on.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that sounds like a good point. I was looking at their website the other day. And
Yeah, he wrote a book called Document Engineering about XML business processes and stuff. And,
It would be good to have help from that type of professions. You don't need to reinvent the wheel.
So I wonder how this thing will scale if it's successful, and planning for success is the right thing. But it sounds like there are two parts that I wonder about. One is the reviewing process. Because if the people producing data get large enough, then the reviewers are going to be overwhelmed. I'm just kind of wondering how that human part of it scales. Astrophysics is different because it's telescopes and satellites producing the data in large quantities, and you don't worry about reviewing them quite in the same way. But that's one question. The other one is, once you get enough of that data from whatever source it grows, where are the bottlenecks in your computational scheme there? It sounded like much of it is embarrassingly parallel, but I wasn't quite sure. Once the number of parameters get high enough and you're doing SDPs over all of them with lots of them, whether there's some other bottleneck that will emerge.
yeah, so I mean, the SDP stuff, we're not going to get into doing SDP research. So we're just going to count on that that's going to just continue along, sparse. So that's going to get better.
I guess what my question was, though, as a function of the number of data items, the number of parameters, how does the complexity of your problem grow?
I think in precisely bad, right? Now there's something about combustion. There's something about chemistry. And Michael, that's why this is. There's a danger of saying this applies to everything, because they're the
model from what you're doing now.
But for these models, where they are at this point in time, although the models that they write down are complex, their behaviors, in some sense, are not that complex. When it's all said and done, the way this flame speed depends on this is.
Parameters never grows very much because otherwise it would be scientifically kind of not sensible.
Well, the parameters is still large in terms of people still may want to. Some may say, "Hey, we're missing." In this chemistry model, I know that this element is produced, but it's not even in the model, so we clearly don't have.
What I meant was 100 parameters or even 1,000 is sort of trivial compared to people who are doing solving PDEs backwards to figure out the structure of the inside of the Earth. There's one unknown for every little grid cell inside the Earth. That's a different scale.
Different scale, completely. I think we're talking the 100 to 1,000 parameters.
Two things. First, you ask the right question. How things will be organized on data aggregation. This is what we actually do. We're going to pattern from our previous experience. We're not going to do like everyone doing the same thing and so on. We're going to split people in the group. In each group, we'll have 5-6 people. We found the optimal number, more or less, and they will be responsible for a piece of, let's say, it's like, say, 5 chapters of Wikipedia going to be responsibility of particular group, and that group will be on a rotational basis. Community grows, so it will be more groups. Now, that's one thing. Second thing about parameter space and scalability. First of all, we have now commitment from Utah group that they actually committed and going to work on
Chris Johnson?
Phil Smith, and I don't know.
Okay.
Right. So basic idea is to use that expertise to create web service for parallel process. So in other words, everything what Andy is saying, that we did the 77 experiment at once and so on, and so we want to depose and challenge, and they took it. So whenever we need a data point, for us it's data, and for simulations it's maybe hours and days of PDEs and so on, and we want it instantaneously. So this is basic, and the things that they can do it for us. This went under Title 2 proposals.
Okay.
Now, in terms of scaling, I always remember quotes that made by Bill Goddard. I don't know if you know him. It's one of the big guys in quantum physics in Caltech and he said in the 1960s, because I asked him, can we use quantum chemistry to calculate material properties? He said, can, but with finesse. And I think this is my answer exactly. If you want to solve straightforward, all this problem with all dimensionality, you cannot do it. So I believe that at every step, you have to play finesse, well justifiable, and so on. And it's a lot of that in what you solve.
Okay.
And I think the same thing will allow us to deal with the
So there are
lack of
also
dimensionality.
automatic techniques for reduced order modeling that to lower dimensionality, and so over time, I'm sure it'll be fun to try all those out and see how much that process can be automated.
You know, and another point to it, that you don't have that many variables on. You know, it's George Bolton, I like to quote him, right? You know, the effect sparsity. Basically, he said, look, in real lives, it's only a small number of variables that really have
On any one thing.
Right. And if you can take this as an advantage, which we do partially, and we can probably push it further with maybe principal components, this, that. So maybe we can solve it. We don't say it, but that gives us at least grounds to continue the research. So this is still research and not production.
When is that meeting? The organizing meeting, is that open?
21st? No, it's very close. It's a small number. Just we want to make it big and so on, but this time, you still, as much as we're saying that our community, it's still a struggle, even within the community, to get some of this concept accepted, and some of them are hidden for reasons that people, scientists don't like word optimization. Period. Whenever they hear word optimization, they leave the room because it's not science.
But the idea is it's a kickoff meeting. The idea is that soon there would hopefully be meetings that would be open. And
we not only that. We wrote in our kind of preliminary charter. It's open membership, and everyone qualifies a member automatically. It's not a club. It's not going to be run as a club. But it's simply, I actually wanted to make it open meeting, but people who want to come say, look, it will be unmanageable. Let's kind of limit it to sell people to start it and then see how it goes. Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
I don't know, probably always. I was just going to say that it seems like you can do even more than provide reviews of things. You could even provide a set of models that need to be tested, like the 10 most important problems to be solved, and you can actually move the community.
Yeah, you could have the thing could automatically be proposing where the bottlenecks are kind of right now. What is it called? Thesis proposal generation system, right? So again, if people there's a lot of neat ideas, and I encourage people to talk to Michael, and if
But you see,
interesting.
I think that you're already working now. Amy kind of pointed out, but it's called a Coney-Graham question. That system will tell us what kind of experiment would be best to do.
Right. Yeah. So
And I think we have some ideas to test.
But you can also, you can query it and say, how would I do the following? It seems like.
Oh no, that's not. We cannot answer. That's not. Mathematics wouldn't tell you how to do this experiment. We can tell you maybe what to measure.
What to measure, right?
Right. But how? This is where what Eddie said. We need good experimentalists who will take the challenge and say, gee, we can measure this and that. But someone will say, maybe I can.
Well, what's really interesting about that, if you publicize that in the right way, that can be a very powerful motivational tool. Have it set up a little competition. Who can get the lowest error margin measurements and stuff and things like that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It will certainly can now tell you that given all that data set, and this is our next paper that we're writing now, given all the data set, if I were to invest money, more, to improve its quality of the data set, what first thing that I have to do? Which experiment repeat? So that's already doable. So stuff like that. So that's, and we hope exactly that will motivate. It scares some people, right? Because some people would rather do, experimentalists like that. And I was one, right? You spend all the time on proposal writing and so on. You build equipment, and then you want to experiment what you can do, not what's needed. And it's very hard to convince someone to, whatever you build, it's nice, but
I'm not sure that any scientist I know is not like that. Theorist, experimental.
Right. And I think, okay, that's a problem. You basically want to do what all of us preach to undergraduates, right? That you have to think logically rather than with presumptions. And that's what we try to push it. And it's hard. I can show you just reviews that I got today.
All right, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.